Okay. So we should be recording. We're going to start where we finished off, but I'm going to jump in a little bit more to digestive anatomy. So if you don't get a flyer, I will make sure one gets posted on the Canvas website. So I see that we ran out of them quickly already. So I'll make sure one gets posted so you guys have it. But equine digestive anatomy. So we're going to start at the mouth and end at the anus. So just like we said on, was that Wednesday already? Foregut starts at the mouth, goes all the way through to the end of the small intestine. So that's why horses are not foregut fermenters. Okay, they're hindgut fermenters. What's the name of an animal that is a foregut fermenter? Cows. Yep. What else? Goats, sheep. Yep. Cattle, bison, deer, antelope. You know, those sorts of things. They are ruminant animals or hindgut fermenters. Here's a horse's hindgut, all the way from the start of the cecum all the way to the end, or out the anus. Okay, and we're going to talk about all of these parts and what they do. Okay. So we're going to start at the oral cavity. So mouth, lips, teeth, gums, all of that is very, very important for what the horses actually need to do to start to bring food in the mouth, right? They have a hard palate, soft palate. In ruminants, they have no top incisors, okay? So they pull stuff out with their tongue, okay? They can't grip it like horses can. And I brought a horse skull. Sorry for everyone who might be listening online. You're not going to see the skull. But here's their front teeth. They have top and bottom teeth, so they're able to rip it out, okay? Rip the grass out. Sometimes they even rip it out by the roots, you know, as they're eating, if you ever watched a horse graze. Okay? They have a very muscular tongue. In horses, they do use their tongue a lot to help manipulate food and move around food, but not as much as they do in ruminants, because ruminants is very, very important. They have a very large area of their tongue that makes it very structural so that they can use it more for grasping food. Horses have a tongue cartilage, so that also kind of helps with the structure of their tongue. There are two kinds of teeth, and horses do actually have both kinds of teeth. The first kind is called brachiodont teeth. That's simple teeth. That's what we have. Okay? We have brachiodont teeth. Dogs do. Horses do when they're young. So their deciduous teeth are called brachiodont teeth. They will grow, they will slough off, and then the new or their permanent teeth will come in. And their permanent teeth are called hypsodont teeth. And hypsodont teeth are actually in horses, except for the canines. The canines are still brachiodont teeth. And then the ruminant cheek teeth, pardon me, and pig tusks. Also, rats. Everyone familiar with rats in here? Or had a rat as a pet? Or yeah, okay. So they have hypsodont teeth too. The key with that is they continually erupt the life of the animal. Okay? So the entire life of the animal, they're going to continue to not necessarily grow. We don't say grow, we say erupt. Because they're always there, they're just erupting from the skull. And I'm going to show you a skull in just a minute so you can see that they're actually already in the skull. They're not growing new teeth, but they're already there. They're just erupting. Okay? Then there's a dental formula. So we're going to learn the dental formula in horses in just a little bit. We've got incisors, canines, premolars, and molars. Okay? And when you do a dental formula, it's going to be based on the right half and the left half. So you're only going to get one half, and it's going to be based as a fraction. Top is going to be top of the fraction, bottom of the fraction. Okay? So let's look at that, and you're going to need to know it. That's what the stars are. So you don't get to print out the stars, but when you come to lecture, you can go ahead and put little stars on your notes, because that means kind of important. Might want to know it for the future. Okay? So here's the horse's mouth, and here is their dental formula. So we've got 3 incisors on each side, right and left, top and bottom. Okay, so 6 total on the top, 6 total on the bottom. But that's why this, and I made a mistake. So do me a favor, put this dental formula in parentheses and put a 2. I forgot to do that when I was writing it in there. Because remember, I said this is only one half, only right or left. Okay? So you got to multiply by 2 to get both sides. Hopefully it's symmetrical, unless your horse got a tooth pulled. It should be symmetrical. Okay? So here we're looking at I1, I2, I3. Start in the middle, I1, and then outside, I2, even further out, I3. Okay? Then they should have canines if they are what? What type of horse has canine teeth? Does it say up there? Might even say up there. It doesn't say up there. What was that? Stallions, males. Yep. Stallions or geldings, because they will have them regardless of their hormones. It's just natural that they have them. So that's why for this canine, it's 1 or 0. If you have a mare, it's not going to have any. Granted, it's not like it's a really, really, really hard and fast rule. I have heard of mares that have canines, but it's rare, and usually they're much more reduced. They're very small. Okay. So then we have premolars, and it starts actually on the lower. So this is the lower cascade. That's the upper arcade. We have P2, 3, and 4, and on the top we have P1, 2, 3, and 4. P1 is called a wolf tooth. Okay? You've had horses. You know that most of them, if you buy them later in their years or age, they're not going to have wolf teeth. They're pulled. Kind of, I equate it to our wisdom teeth, kind of like our wisdom teeth. Some people keep them or still have them. Most of us get them pulled, usually when we're young. Some can get pulled when they're older. It's the exact same thing. Okay? Most of our horses are going to have them pulled when they're young before they have to have a bit in their mouth. Because if you think about it, this is where the bit is going to lie. Okay? If you're a rider and you pull on the reins and it hits those tiny little teeth, it can either break them off really easily or it can hit the nerve. It's very, very uncomfortable for them. So that's why they typically get pulled. But again, that's why this P is either 3 or 4. Because if they're young, they could potentially still have it. Most of them, as they get older, don't. Okay? And some might not, just like people. How many people in here never had their wisdom teeth? Yeah, a lot of you guys. Wow. So, yeah. I know, I think I only had my top ones. So who knows why it happens. Genetics, I guess. I don't know. Okay, so let's look at what it looks like in a skull. So here's a skull, and here is an x-ray of a skull. You don't see all of that. All you see is what comes out of the skull. Okay, all of this, that's why I said they erupt, they don't grow. They are up there. They are in there. So let me take a look at this. Make sure I don't drop it. You can see right there, actually these are the teeth. They come all the way up that far. This is a young horse. So its bones are very fragile, and actually when they composted it, it fractured there a little bit. So you can actually see the top of the tooth coming out of the skull in that area. So they have them even when they're young. And we'll guess how old this guy is in just a little bit. But you can see that he has that much tooth there. Okay. Ever heard the phrase long in the tooth? What's that mean? You're old. Yeah. That's where it gets it from. Horses. The phrase comes from horses because as they get older, their teeth get longer because they keep erupting. And if they're not really filing it down at the same rate as they're growing, their mouth, the shapes change of the teeth, and their mouth changes. Okay? And even if you do get a yearly float, the dentist does a yearly float, you're still going to get some tooth growth, and the teeth are going to get longer. Okay? So let's look at that. Need more hands here. So know that dental formula, again, put parentheses around that whole equation with the 2, because that's how you're going to get your 36 to 42 teeth. Okay? So that's what it looks like. Actually, this skull has been basically, cut off so that you see the whole entire tooth. And this is a pretty old horse. You can see its jawline is turned more into a beak shape. Okay, as they're younger, and you saw this horse, they were a little bit more vertical. And then as they grow, they get a little bit more horizontal up here in the front incisors. So you can actually age a horse by its teeth. Again, I love these little phrases. Ever hear, don't look a gift horse in the mouth? Yes. What does that mean?
Like if someone gave you a horse as a gift, like it's rude if you look in the mouth to see how old it is.
Exactly. If someone gave me a horse and said, oh, look at this beautiful 3-year-old filly, it's yours. And you're going to go look in its mouth and go, that's not a 3-year-old filly. That thing's like 25 years old. I don't know what you're talking about. Okay? It is rude. You're not supposed to look a gift horse in the mouth. Okay, so way back in the day. Because you can actually tell how old they are by looking at their teeth. And I'm just going to go through a couple really brief things, and then we're going to look at this skull. And these are all the things we'll look at quickly here. So first, you can age a horse when it's really young by when the teeth come in, and that's what we're going to do with this skull here. So we got I1, I2, I3, the canines and the males, and then the wolf teeth. So the temporary teeth will start coming in baby horses at 8 days, 8 weeks, 8 months. Wasn't that nice of them to make it so easy to remember? 8 days, 8 weeks, 8 months. And yeah, okay, it might be a day or two off here or there, a week or two off here or there, but that's the basic general rule of when the incisors are going to come in young horse, okay? Then when they start losing their deciduous teeth and their permanent teeth start coming in, I1, 2, and 3 are going to come in at 2.5, 3.5, and 4.5 years old. Again, really nice, convenient, easy to remember. Horses that are male, the canines are going to start coming in kind of around the same time as that I3, so between 4 and 5 years old. And they'll have their wolf teeth come in pretty early, so it should come in with their deciduous teeth around 6 months old. Okay? Again, that's if they're going to have them. The cups we're going to talk about in just a little bit. So let's look at this guy first. And I'm just going to pick up the top skull because it's easiest. So, is this the right one? Yeah, we're gonna look at him this way. Okay, I'm just gonna walk around. You guys can take a look and tell me what you think based on just what I told you. And I already told you he's young, but you're gonna tell me how old you think he is. But don't say anything yet until I get all the way around the classroom. Did I say he? I meant he or she. So first you're going to tell me, is it a he or a she? And then you're going to tell me how old you think he is. And I know I'm going a little quick because we're going to talk about it too. This should give you enough to go by to tell you roughly how old you think he or she is. He or she? Okay. We're not going to talk about that yet, so I got both. That's fine. Now, how old do you think it is?
8 months.
2.5, 8 months. Anybody else want to take another guess? Okay, so now let's walk through it. What are these two? Are these deciduous or permanent? The two in the middle. What did you say? Permanent. So I1s are permanent, okay? So if I were to put it together, so it probably would help a little bit to put it together. You can tell by the shape of the teeth, actually. So now if we look at them, so see the shape of the teeth on the outside? The shape of the teeth on the outside, that's the typical brachydont style tooth. It has a neck, and it has a crown, and it has a tooth. So it kind of looks like if I were to make a fist, it looks like my wrist. It looks like my hand. So you have the typical deciduous teeth on the outside. So the inside teeth are your permanent teeth, okay? So this guy, all he wants for Christmas is his 2 front teeth, right? So he's starting to get in his I1s. So now if we look there, how old is he? Gianna, what did you say? He's worried about 2.5 because they haven't come in contact with each other yet. They've just erupted, and actually if he had skin, I bet you wouldn't even see him. Okay? We could see him because he doesn't have skin. Okay? So he's 2.5 years old, and I keep saying he, so I'm giving it away. Okay? When does his canines come in? See those little holes there? Again, if he had skin, you wouldn't have been able to see that he's actually getting canines because you can actually kind of see them. Yeah. So you can actually see the holes of where the canines are erupting. See those holes there? So the canines are actually erupting from. See that? I think, and I'm not going to come around again, but yep, you could even see his tiny little wolf teeth are just starting to come in as well. Okay, so he's got one that's popping out and one there's just a hole there. Okay, yeah.
They get temporary teeth. Do they lose them?
Yep, absolutely. So just like we do, they'll get pushed out by the permanent teeth coming in. Yep. So this guy, you know, he'll start. Actually, I think this was an off-the-track horse. I don't know. I got our skull. We have a whole skeleton out at the barn, and he brought the skull with him and said, "Here, you can have this too." So he does a lot of that model making and stuff. He composts animals and then makes the skeletons. So that's where we got him from. But you can see how when they're younger, it's so much easier to identify them. As they get older, it gets trickier because then once all of their teeth come in, you start to have to look at what's called a cup. And you could kind of see from this guy, actually the bottom one might be easier. Yeah, very carefully, please. I'm not going to walk it around now. But look at the two front teeth that he's missing. And you can see you can actually almost you can take it and pass it around for me. You can put your fingernail in there. It's called a cup. So when the teeth are grown, they look like this. And that's kind of a cross-section of it. There's a hole in the middle of it, okay? So as they get older, the wearing down of the teeth is going to make that cup disappear. So they're still going to have a cup, or it's just going to start to go away at 5 years old. So now he's got all of his teeth. So how do you know that once they're older? We start looking at this cup. And then the shape of the table of the teeth is going to change from an oval to almost triangular. And that cup is going to wear down till then all you see is this little dental star, it's called. So it's just going to have a little star. This is an art. I know our dentist that used to do the teeth here, he was amazing at it. I had all 12 of my horses when he first started doing the teeth. I just threw all the horses out there. He would start doing them. I'm like, how old do you think this one is? How old do you think that one is? He went through all 12 horses. They were all between the ages of like 6 and 12 at that time. He nailed every single one of them within 3 months of their birthday. So it's quite an art. It is not as easy as it makes it sound, especially after they get older. Then once they have all their permanent teeth, it's pretty tricky. There's a couple other things you could kind of see from this slide. At 2 years old, you know, how they look, and these are the little deciduous teeth. And then, like I said, here they're growing in, so these look a little more square, and that guy is just erupting, so that's about 4.5 years old. But then as they get even older, you look at things called a hook. There's a little hook here that comes at 7 and again at 9. And then you also, or it's 7 and 11, but it goes away at 9. I don't know, it's kind of a weird sort of thing. And then there's this Galvane's groove as they get older. And the Galvane's groove grows halfway down at 15, all the way down at 20. It starts to disappear halfway at 25, and it's totally gone by 30. And it's, you know, a lot of people say, oh, you can't really rely on that. You can come close, okay? And this guy's not going to have it. He's too young. Yep. Only on I3. That's the only place you're going to have both the hook and the Galvane's groove. And it's just how the shape of the skull changes with age. So, yeah, here's the hook. So it's here at 7, gone at 9, back at 11. You might have something that looks like a hook at 9, but it actually really becomes a hook at 7. And actually, my horse is 11 this year. I'm going to check her mouth. I'll take a picture of it for you, and I'll show you if it is true in most horses. And my other old horse, she's 21, so she should have a full Galvane's groove, and I'll check her out and see if that's the case. So, but it's just interesting to see. If you have a horse at home, go ahead and check it out and see if it holds true. Doesn't always, but sometimes it does. And then here's that Galvane's groove, like it said. Starts at 10, 15, 20, 25, and 30. Okay? So, moving on from teeth, okay? Because we're still at the head, right? And we have a lot of stuff to go through. So, salivary glands, really important. I'm just going to run over quickly some of the salivary glands, and we'll look at a couple of them. There's an awful lot of them. I don't need you to know all their names, but just some of the more important ones we'll look at. But they're very important because saliva starts the digestive process, right? So It consists of water, some protein, glycoproteins, electrolytes, etc. So they are actually labeled by the major glands are actually located further away from the mouth, and then they have really long ducts that run into the mouth. Some of the minor glands are a little closer, and they're like right under the tongue or right at the top of the mouth, and they just have really short glands. So things like your buccal gland, buccal means cheek, are right inside your cheeks, okay? But then the parotid glands are all the way up underneath the ears, okay, and they have a long gland. So let's look at some of these. You just set it on the table for me, thanks. So there's also, they lie right alongside the salivary glands too. So this is, the lymph nodes. So actually this right here is a lymph node, but this guy is the salivary gland. So there's the mandibular salivary gland, which lies right under your arch of your jaw. And that's where it is in the horse. Then there's a parotid gland. I already said it, that animation was a little off. And then the sublingual gland. So those are some of the more major ones. Parotid, under the ear, mandibular, under the jaw, and sublingual, kind of right under the tongue. Okay? So those are the three more major ones, and they have long ducts that run to them. You can kind of see in this picture, so that's a lymph node there, and so is that. You can kind of see, yeah, this one here labeled F, and there's another F. That's the zygomatic gland. It's actually up on the top of the mouth, and it's some smaller ones in that area. Okay. But I think the three main ones to remember are the parotid gland, the mandibular gland, and the sublingual gland. Okay. So there's a lot of them, and they produce a lot of saliva. Okay. Horses can produce quite a bit of saliva, and they need to, because think about what they're eating, right? They're eating a lot of hay, okay? A lot of really dried forage. And not a lot of horses like to dunk their hay in water, okay? I know some do. Some make a mess of it, but a lot of them don't. So they're relying on that saliva to moisten it before they have to swallow. Unlike myself, whenever I talk, I never seem to have a problem, right? Okay, good to know those major glands. Okay, so then we're going to move down, and what do we move down from the mouth to when we swallow? Esophagus, right? We swallow. Deglutition, swallowing, goes into the stomach, okay? At the end of the esophagus is a sphincter, okay? So the sphincter is called the cardiac sphincter, or the cardia, and we'll look at the inside of the stomach. So that's where that is. And it's all nice squamous cell, really pretty pink skin that goes into the stomach, and then it starts to line the top half of the stomach, okay? So the stomach in horses is similar to ours in some ways, meaning that it's just one compartment, unlike the rumen, which has 4 compartments, okay? It's just one compartment, but it's not similar to ours because it's actually called a composite stomach. It has a glandular and a non-glandular lining, okay? Ours is completely glandular, okay? We secrete hydrochloric acid, pepsin, other enzymes, etc. When? When do human stomachs secrete hydrochloric acid? Anyone know? No? Is anyone hungry in here? Thinking of food? Or did you just eat? I just ate, right? So you're producing that now, okay? Right around food. Thinking of food, actually eating food, digesting food. That's when our stomachs secrete, okay? In the middle of the night, it should be fairly quiet, okay? Shouldn't. Not with horses. 24/7, 365, their stomachs are always producing the acid. That's why they have half a stomach that can secrete it and half a stomach that doesn't, okay? And we're going to see pictures of this in just a minute, okay? And we'll talk about the consequences, negative and positive, for the double lining there. Okay, so composite stomach means they have both. Simple stomach, however, means they have just one compartment to their stomach, unlike a ruminant animal, which is the complex stomach, 1 true stomach, 3 4 stomachs. Remember, I mentioned that? They don't have 4 stomachs. They've got 3 compartments and 1 true stomach. Okay? All right, know all those parts. We're getting there. I'm going to show you a picture in just a little bit. In terms of horses, their stomach capacity is fairly small. It's actually not a whole lot bigger than ours. And if you think about it, they're 1,000 pounds. We're, 100 to make math easy? 10 times more than us? Is not 10 times bigger than ours is, okay? It only can hold up to about 2 to 4 gallons in an average size horse, okay? So think about that when feeding horses. What do they need to do in the wild, or what do we need to do for them while feeding? Because they have such a small stomach. What do you think? How are we going to feed them with such a small stomach? What? Constantly, or small amounts, more often? Exactly. That's why horses evolved as grazers or browsers. There's some, historical facts seeing that they've also grabbed branches and leaves and things like that as well. But they will be eating about 12 to 18 hours out of their day, okay? So that is to make basically a trickle feed through the stomach, but also because they produce hydrochloric acid 24/7, something always needs to be in that stomach, okay? So there's a couple things, and we're building up to why we feed horses the way we do, really, with just this lecture, okay? So once food goes in that stomach, that cardiac sphincter is tight, and it's turned in such a way that horses are not able to vomit, okay? Stuff goes in, cannot come out. If they eat a toxic plant, okay, and it doesn't make them feel so hot, it has a long way to go before it gets out the other end or before it can be detoxified. And we'll talk about that in just a little bit, okay? So really important that when they eat something, they eat what they should be eating. It's a veterinary intervention if you need to get it out. They'll need to, place a nasogastric tube and pump the stomach and get it out that way, okay? And this continuous secretion. So a lot of this stuff leads them to have a lot of, if we don't take care of them, if there are horses, some negative impacts. And one of those is gastric ulcers. So here's a picture of a nice, pretty clean stomach, okay? Right here, this pink area, that's the non-glandular portion, or the squamous cell that comes down from the esophagus and starts coating the stomach. Really nice, pretty pink. All this yellow is just some secretions, some of the saliva, etc. And then there's this pink portion. You can kind of see it. This was done nasogastric scope, so you can kind of see it. But really nice, pretty pink area as well. Anyone know what the line is called that they join? Margoplicatus, or, do you have another name for it? Folded margin, it's also called. So either name is fine, Margoplicatus or folded margin. If you're going to vet school, no Margoplicatus. I've also heard it Margoplicatus. I say tomatoes, however you want to say it. So here's what it can look like, though, if you have stomach ulcers. It's a little hard of a picture to see. Let me dim the lights a little bit so you can see it a little better. So again, here's the Margoplicatus. Here's the pink glandular area. This big area here, you can see kind of the scarring and the reddening. That's an ulcer. That's considered a grade 3 ulcer. You can't really see them very well, but they continue all around the Margoplicatus. And you see down here is where all of that acid will sit, okay? If they don't have if they have an empty stomach, they start exercising or moving around, it's going to slosh up onto the non-glandular portion, and it can cause ulcers. There's another big ulcer right on the Margoplicatus as well, but all those are grade 3. So this is why a lot of racehorses are really prone to ulcers. They've actually done studies showing between 80 and 90% of all racehorses have gastric ulcers. Because what do we do with them? We fast them for 4 hours before they race. We dehydrate them so they're lighter and can run. And then we run them. So the 3 main things, they're dehydrated, they're empty stomachs, and they're exercising. 3 of the worst things you can do if you really want ulcers, that's what you do. You fast them, you dehydrate them, and then you run them or you exercise them. So that's why a lot of racehorses do have that. Unfortunately, and actually I said I do a lot of storytelling, that was my horse. She was an off-the-track thoroughbred, got her, good eater, she was okay, and then all of a sudden one day just didn't want to eat anything. And I went, that's not right. We had just traveled to a show, really big show, high-stress environment. She went off her feed. Next couple days, we scoped her. That's what her stomach looked like, okay? So she was telling me something. It hurts to eat, and I don't want to eat. hay, bring it on. She loved it. Hay cubes, anything with fiber in it, they actually will like. It's the concentrates, the grains and stuff is what they usually go off of. Because, and we'll get into this in this class, all the high concentrate feeds make a lower pH in the stomach. Okay? Lower pH in the stomach is going to make those ulcers really, really painful. Okay? So 30 days after treatment, now that's what her stomach, well, hopefully now, this has been 2 years, but that's what her stomach looks like. So we were able to clear it up. It can be expensive, and it does take a lot of treatment. So now I got to make sure she's always got feed in front of her. There's some medication they can go on too, but yeah. So it's all about management to keep them nice and happy and healthy. And not all horses get them. It's really funny. A lot of the more stressed ones, a lot of the thoroughbreds, even though they're not racing anymore, they seem to get them. And if they're never cleared up, once they leave the track, if they go somewhere else, like to a rescue, if they aren't treated, they don't really just go away naturally. So she probably always had them for the few years that I had her before they were actually diagnosed, just maybe asymptomatic, you know. People can live with them. They just suck it up and deal with it until it gets to a point where they get too severe. Okay? So let's look at parts of the stomach. Because remember I said we're going to look at parts of the digestive system, but then we're going to break it down into parts of the parts. So where the esophagus comes in was the cardia. Then we have the greater and the lesser curvature. Greater is just around it's the bigger curve, basically, in the stomach. The lesser curve is right here. You have parietal and visceral surfaces. Parietal just means it's close to the liver. Visceral meaning it's closer to the abdomen and the rest of the viscera, so the rest of the organs. Okay? Just good to know the picture, but more. I'm not going to really do pictures on exams or anything. This kind of comes from my anatomy class, which you would learn a lot more. But what I really like you to know is, say I was a piece of hay, and it started at the mouth. Where does it go, and what does it touch? So when it enters the stomach, what are the different parts that it comes in contact with? Okay? So there was the cardiac opening. And then we have 3 different areas. We have the fundus, the body, and the pylorus. So those are the 3. So the fundus is this opening here right at the top of the stomach, and the cardia is just kind of a blind pouch or a blind sac, which is another name for it. And then there's the body. It's also sometimes called the saccocecus. You'll see that in your book. If you've been reading your book, they actually have a really good digestive anatomy section. They call it the saccocecus. That's the body area. And then the pylorus. Okay, and that's what empties into the small intestine. We'll go there from there. So there's more parts to know. So let's open it up and look at it. So this is a stomach that's been opened up. So you can see area 3, that's going to be the cardia, okay, or the opening where the esophagus comes into. Okay, and then 4, that's going to be your non-glandular portion. 6 is going to be your glandular portion. Then there's also this area. It's an extended part of the fundus. So we have 7, which is right here on this, is correlated to that. So basically the fundus in the horse is called the blind sac. Okay? And that blind sac is just an extension of the fundus. Ours doesn't look that big. It's not that large. Okay? So horses, it's kind of extended. And then here's that folded margin, or the margo plicatus. So it's the line right between the glandular and the non-glandular parts where they come together, okay? And primarily, that's where you're going to find gastric ulcers. If you're going to have gastric ulcers, a lot of times that's where they're at. Sometimes you'll see them up around the cardia. If they're really bad, they'll be streaked throughout. But sometimes you'll also find them around the pyloric sphincter, or at the bottom of the pylorus. This is what it looks like with feed inside of it before it was washed off. So you can kind of see it basically looks like chewed up hay, right? Lots of saliva, chewed up pieces of hay and stuff in there. Okay. Now we're moving on to the small intestine. Okay? So you go out the pyloric sphincter into the small intestine. What are the 3 parts of the small intestine? First one is duodenum or duodenum. Heard it said both ways. What's the next one? Jejunum, that's the really, really long part in the middle. And then what? Ileum at the end. So duodenum and ileum are only about 1 foot to 2 feet long. The rest of it is about 70 feet. So most horses got about 50 to 70 feet, holds about 10 to 23 gallons. It's a big range there because there's a lot of different size horses. Okay. This is actually one of the necropsies we did for the anatomy class. You can't even see where it ends. It ends somewhere over there and then loops back. So really, really, really long. Majority of your nutrients are digested and absorbed here. Okay? So you're going to have absorption, digestion and absorption of the rest of your proteins, your fats, your soluble carbohydrates, so sugars, starches, things that are easily broken down. Okay, we're going to talk about that a little bit more. Not water. Okay, why? Why would you want to get rid of your water right now? You wouldn't, right? Yeah, you need it because there's a lot more left in that system. So it needs to help keep everything lubricated going through. So not water, but also vitamins and minerals. Don't forget that. So pretty much everything. What's the one thing I didn't mention other than water? Roughage, yep. Structural carbohydrates. Okay? And I'm not going to go over that too much today because that's Jen's portion on Wednesday. Okay? So good to know that. Let's take a little bit more time and talk about it. Duodenum, jejunum, ileum, pretty much grossly similar in all animals. Okay? Maybe the way they digest nutrients is going to be a little bit different, but primarily what it looks like is all going to be pretty much the same. Okay? So the duodenum actually has a bunch of tiny different parts to it. Okay? It starts off and it kind of just goes back and forth and it like squiggles back and forth for a little bit. It has a cranial part, cranial duodenal flexure. So flexures mean it curves over on itself pretty quickly, so that's what a flexure is. Descending duodenum, caudal flexure, ascending duodenum, duodenal jejunal flexure. So that's the end right before it enters the jejunum. So when it's all packed inside the horse, it has this specific pattern that it goes through, and that's what all these different parts are. And that's just the duodenum. Then you got the jejunum, which is a bunch of spaghetti, and then you got the ileum at the end, which is only like the last part. There is also a sigmoid loop, which is in both the horse, the ruminant, and the pig. But that's in part of the duodenum as well. It's hard to visualize this, and I actually have a bunch of pictures in my anatomy book. I didn't use them here because it's very hard to visualize the small intestine because there's so much in there, especially all of this, all of that there. Does anyone know what that is, all that yellow? What's it called? It is the connective tissue. What's it called when it's attached to the intestines? Oh. That's what it is. That's mesentery. Okay? I was waiting for someone to say omentum. What's omentum? Still connective tissue, but what is that attached to? The what? No. Stomach. Omentum attaches to the stomach. Mesentery attaches to intestines, but also there's specific names for every type, and I'm generalizing here, but there is a mesentery that's on the reproductive organs as well. It's all called something very specific. The what? It's a broad ligament. They also like to call it the meso. They say meso pieces. So and I get into that. If you really want to get into anatomy, take my anatomy class in the fall, because we'll get into all of that. So, all right. So jejunum, longest part, ileum, short part, folded. There's a bunch of peritoneum. That's all also more connective tissue. And again, I'm not getting really super into the specific terms here. But that all empties then into the large intestine. So the ileum is the end of the foregut. All right? So good to know all those parts and pieces. So then we're starting off with the hindgut. And the first thing you come to when you come to the hindgut is going to be an opening that's going to get you into the cecum. So anytime you hear an opening, it's going to name the two parts that it connects. Okay? So in this case, you're going to have an iliocecal opening. Ileum to cecum. All right? Iliocecal opening. Can't really see it here in this picture. It's kind of hidden underneath all this. But that's how it gets into the cecum. And the cecum is the first part of the hindgut. All right? The first, or what is pretty much equated to the rumen in, it's the big fermentation vat. And again, we're going to not really talk about fermentation because Jen's got a whole lecture on it next week. But this way you can at least visualize the parts that she's going to be talking about next week because she's skipping over the parts. So the cecum is huge, though. It's about 3 to 4 feet long. And probably once it's full, gets about a foot in diameter or so. It has the base, the body, and the apex. The apex is the blind end because it basically goes in and comes out the same end. Okay? So it goes in and it turns around and it stays there for 24, 48 plus hours, depending on the feed stuff. And it just kind of sits in there and it ferments. Okay? So it sits in there a long time, depending on the feed stuff. And all the peristaltic action kind of keep things moving around. So that's the cecum there. Looks like kind of a big cone-shaped structure. So then it's going to come out the cecum in a different hole, but in the same area. So they're kind of right next to one another. The ileal colic opening, or the cecal colic opening. Cecum to colon. Okay? Cecal colic opening. All right? And that is going to be the beginning of the large colon. So good thing to know there. So we're going to stay with the cecum for just a little bit more, though. So all the liquids and everything are passed into the cecum. Okay? The cecum is what starts to detoxify any toxic substances. So if your horse is just eating something toxic, okay, it has about 70 plus feet to go through of intestine before it can start to be detoxified. So that's why a lot of horses are very, very prone to having toxic issues with different feeds, okay? Whether it's a toxic plant or mold on corn or anything like that, it takes a really long time to be detoxified. If we have time, I would love to do a toxic plant lecture. However, right now I don't have it on the syllabus because I think we got a lot of other stuff to talk about, but it might fall in somewhere around when we talk about pastures, okay? Lots and lots of toxic plants out there. It's amazing our horses don't die every day. They are actually smart. There's a lot of mechanisms they have that makes them stay away from toxic things, but there are a few things that they just love so much that they're not going to stay away from, and I'll just mention one of them really quickly. If you have a lot of maple trees around your pastures and you have a big windstorm and it blows one of the trees or a limb of a tree into your field, those leaves start to wilt. And once those red maple, particularly leaves, start to wilt, they become full of sugar. They really, because they're not able to utilize the sugars made through photosynthesis because they're dying, they get loaded with sugar. Horses love them. There is no way that you would be able to get your horse to stay away from the wilted leaves in a red maple tree. Red maples are very toxic to horses. Okay? Most horses, once they clean off a branch of leaves, really hard for most veterinarians to bring them back. There really is no cure. It's pretty fatal. Okay? So that's why if I go to a farm and I'm consulting for someone who has pastures, I say, just get rid of your trees. You love your horses. I know you love trees, but you love your horses more, so get rid of the red maples. All right, that was a little side note. So here's what the cecum really looks like, and this is during a necropsy. It's a little distended because things do distend after post-mortem. But you can see the apex down here, and then this is the body, and the base is up here. So lots of microbial fermentation. This slide was just a placeholder. If I forgot to say it, but I've already said it about 100 times. On Wednesday, you'll hear from Jen. She's going to talk a lot about this. So very slow transit time. Really depends on the feeds and the feeds that are going in there. Concentrates are going to be much quicker than forages are, if the concentrates are even left here. Okay? So a lot of the soluble carbohydrates are probably already gone, hopefully, unless they have a carbohydrate overload, then you're going to get a little of that here. And Jen will cover that too. So then we're moving on to the large colon. So we just passed through the cecal colic opening into the large colon. And this is another necropsy picture. For those of you, I can say that again, we do a necropsy in the fall of my anatomy class, and a lot of these pictures came from that. That's comparative mammalian anatomy, if you guys don't know. So that is their large colon. It's going to be about 10 to 12 feet long, okay, if it's all extended. So that's probably about 6 feet laying on the ground there. It's doubled over. It's in 4 main parts, and there's 3 flexures in between. So again, in order for it to get it all inside the horse, it needs to fold up nicely. So when it's all folded up and inside the animal, it can actually hold 14 to 16 gallons, so it's pretty large. It starts off the right ventral colon, which is down on this side. Then you have a sternal flexure. So it's going to tell you exactly where it is, right? Where's your sternum? Right? That's the same picture of a horse. Okay? It's right there. So it comes back up to their sternum, and then it goes back down on itself, the left ventral colon. What side's ventral? Top of the back or bottom of the belly? Bottom of the belly. When you think of dorsal, okay, what do you think of? Dorsal fin, dorsal stripe, okay? So think dorsal on the back, ventral on the belly. So we're on the right ventral, sternal flexure, left ventral. Then we got a pelvic flexure. So now we're back down here. It turns around again, and actually this is the pelvic flexure right here. Then we go back up the dorsal colon, and the diaphragmatic flexure curves again up by the diaphragm, so we're back up by the sternum, and then we're right down the right dorsal colon. So right ventral, left dorsal, right dorsal, with the flexures in between. Okay, and I'll show you a picture of the way it looks kind of sandwiched inside. Flexures are really, really commonplace for impactions, okay? If you don't have enough water and the water doesn't keep going through the system, you could really get, because look what happens. This is like the worst plumbing design ever. Look at how big of a diameter this is, and then look at how narrow it gets, okay? And then it stays narrow, then it gets big again, okay? So yeah, plumber's worst nightmare, going from something like this to something like that, and then big again, okay? All of those flexures get really complicated if you don't have enough lubrication to get the food through. Here's another picture of it. There's that pelvic flexure. This is what the food looks like inside by that point. Again, to me, it still just looks like kind of chewed up hay. Starting to turn into what manure might look like, okay? But it's a little more liquidy because we haven't absorbed the water yet, okay? Water does start to be absorbed in the colon, okay? But by the time it reaches the small colon, then the rest of it will be absorbed. So the large colon is also sometimes called the great colon, or in all other species is called the ascending colon. Every animal does have, other than us and dogs, has parts to its ascending colon. Ours is very simple, just up, down, over, because we don't have to eat hay or ferment a whole lot, right? But then you have all these parts. So these are the parts I just went through, just in a little bit different way. Then after the ascending colon, they do have a transverse colon, which is just a really short little area that moves into the descending colon. And again, all animals have a descending colon, but we call it the small colon in our horses. Okay? And this is where you're going to start to make the fecal balls. And all the rest of the water that needs to be absorbed will be absorbed. And then at the end, you got the rectum. There's a little pouch called the rectal ampulla that just kind of holds some manure. Okay? Really important to know all those parts. So let's look at a picture. So we're back at this picture. Because this is kind of the way it looks inside the horse. Granted, it's going to be crammed in there a lot more. But this is how it's laying out. So we had the, so this was the ilium here, so the end of it. And it's going to go into, what's the opening? Ileocecal opening. Yep, there you go. Then you're in the cecum here. Then once you come out of the cecum, what is it opening called? Cecal colic, yep, or colic, however you want to say it, and that's under there as well, so you don't see it yet. So now we're going to go into the right ventral colon. So let's think about it. If I was the horse, which way am I laying? Am I laying like this, facing you guys, or am I laying like this? So hint here, and I know my head is up because it's sternal and diaphragmic up there and pelvic down there, right? So my head is up. But based on what you see, feet out or away from you? Toward you or away from you? Yep. Because see, the dorsal is here and it's facing you guys. Ventral is there. So the horse is laying like this. Okay? That gives you kind of a little visual, right? So we have the right ventral colon down here. So it's all the one that's kind of sacculated. It looks like it's ribbed. Then the sternal flexure. then the left ventral colon, so laying on that side, then that pelvic flexure. So that's what I showed you a lot of pictures of. It starts to get really small, and it smooths out. Looks nice and smooth. And then the left dorsal colon stays a little small and nice and smooth. And then the diaphragmatic flexure, they lie right on top of one another, the sternal and the diaphragmatic. And then the right ventral colon comes down the other side. And then this transverse colon, very, very small little piece, gets really narrow again. Okay, another common site of impaction. And then the descending colon right there. Yeah, what was that?
So the diaphragmatic flexure lies on top of the sternal flexure.
Yep, diaphragmatic and sternal flexures are stacked on top of one another. Yep. So the sternum is going to be, the sternal flexure is going to be a little more ventrally, just like you see, right ventral, sternal, left ventral. So just think of where your sternum is. That's where it's laying.
So just in the horse, so from my understanding, the sternal is up here and the diaphragmatic is down here?
Flip it.
Flip it.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Oh, good, obviously.
Yep. Think of the feet headed away from the screen or away from your computer, however you're looking at it. Yep. Okay. So let's quick go back and look at those pictures. So all these little sacculations, all those little ribbed areas, okay, that's the ventral colon. The right and left ventral colon look like that. Then the smooth pelvic flexure and the smooth dorsal colon. Okay, even looks a little better on this one. You can really see all the sacculations, and then it gets nice and smooth. Okay, yeah, actually it goes underneath it. You can't see the whole thing really well in that picture. Okay. All right. Do I got a big star? Nope, don't have a big star. So same picture, but now we're just going to look at this part. Ooh, I thought I had it blocked off. Okay. If you block that off, this area right there, that's just the small colon. So it's the same length. It's still about 10 feet-ish long. It's only going to hold about 5 gallons. The diameter is much smaller. It's only about 2 to 3 inches in diameter. So you can kind of see here, it looks like a fecal ball might be in there. Almost, when it's not full, kind of looks like it could be the small intestine. But it's a little bit bigger, a little bit thicker, and that's where all the fecal balls are made. Water absorption and the formation of the fecal balls there. And then the very end, which I actually think is beyond the picture right here, is about 1 foot in length. And the rectum, really its main function is just to be a reservoir for poop, right? Okay? Feces just sits there until the horse is ready to go. And usually that's right when you walk them into the barn, right in the barn aisle, or as soon as you put them on the trailer, right on the trailer. You know, whenever you don't want them to poop, on your neighbor's lawn, you know, anything like that. They always know when you don't want them to go. All right, so that's why they can kind of save it for a little while. So there's a couple clinical things or clinical problems that can happen. As I can, I'll pull in some clinical things that just might kind of give you an idea of what could go wrong. And the first one here is cecal dilation, or it's called volvulus. Now, all of these things that many of you may have heard of colic in horses, okay? Colic is a really, really nasty problem. There's a lot of different etiologies for colic, and every one of them has a little different name. So this is actually a type of colic, volvulus or cecal dilation, which is actually the twisting of the cecum, and then it fills with gas, and it gets distended, okay? So if you think about it, okay, gas hurts, right? I'm not going to be shy. Say it. You got gas, it hurts. It hurts a lot in horses when that cecum twists off and they can't get it out, okay? That's when they start rolling and they create a lot of problems, and that's why it can be fatal, because you can shut off the blood supply of that organ, okay, and they're going to die. So usually if you have a twisting like this, it's a veterinary emergency, okay, and they need to go in there and get it untwisted, okay? Yeah.
I worked with horses a
Yep.
long time.
Yep.
But before the vet, you'd always be walking that horse to prevent the rolling. But can the horses overcome it without the vet from the moment?
If it's completely twisted, typically no. However, I will say there are certain types, and I don't want to get into it in detail because I'm not a veterinarian, but there are some types, if you exercise that horse in just the right way, it can kind of help untwist it. So typically the walk won't do it. Walk just helps if it's not twisted. It just kind of helps move the gas through if possible, and it keeps them from rolling. But there's some things, and actually we've had it happen a couple times here at Rutgers, If there's a ligament that sometimes the intestines can loop over. It's the splenic ligament. And if it gets stuck over there, it'll also wall itself off. But if you get them cantering, and we actually used both times, well, one time we used the treadmill because she was treadmill trained. The other time we lunged the horse. And you just get them cantering for like 10, 15 minutes. I mean, you almost think you're going to kill them if they're not used to it. Because the motion of the canter will help dislodge that and put it back into place. And actually, both times it worked. And the vet, it was actually the same vet both times. We used Foundation Equine, and they actually have 4 vets now. And we just so happened to get the emergency call, the same vet both times, and it worked both times. It dislodged. So depending on the type, but you do need veterinary intervention to figure out what type it is and what's twisted and what's where. And she could figure it out by doing a rectal palpation. She could feel by going in the rectum that it was in the wrong place. And actually at that time, the spleen was a little distended as well. There was multiple issues. And so you can kind of shrink the size of the spleen, get them exercising, and kind of everything goes back into place. So, yeah. So, again, more different types of colics. There's, impactions, there's twists, there's gas, there's a lot of different problems. If it does get impacted, typically some of these flexures are the case, the pelvic flexure, the transverse colon, or even at the base of the cecal colic opening can. But usually, the vet will do a nasogastric tube of a lot of mineral oil to kind of help move things through, and usually that helps. The one time it's not going to help is if you have something that's too big at the opening and it's not going to move it through no matter what you do. And some of these, this problem can be enteroliths. Anyone know or heard of an enterolith? Yeah? What? Tell me what you know.
Like these really hard, almost calcified balls.
Yep. They can be. They can be like stones, like kidney stones, only they get big. So what happens is there's mineral secretions. Sometimes this happens with horses that are on really high mineral diets, particularly calcium, high calcium diets, and just over time, it starts to accumulate. Sometimes what happens, too, if an animal were to ingest a penny or something metal, it actually can almost act as a magnet and kind of collect. And over years and years and years, if it doesn't actually get passed, it can just kind of keep collecting things. And actually, got some little show and tell things from a retired vet. I love pulling these guys out. They can get very large. So I don't know that I would call this pretty, but this is an enterolith, okay? It actually says, this was from August of 1997, and El Troubadour was the poor horse's name. And the reason why I say poor horse is because the vet who gave this to me was actually doing a necropsy because the horse did die, and he went in and he found this was blocking part of one of the flexures. They didn't tell me which. So very large, very heavy. You guys can pass it around. It's clean, don't worry. You might get a little chalky because it is, he said, it was from a farm. They fed very high calcium diets, a.k.a. alfalfa. We'll learn a lot about that too. And this horse was kind of born and raised there. It was 20 plus years old and finally had that. So it takes many, many, many years, but it can happen. He said a few years later, he went back to that same farm for another horse. And this one was even bigger and very, very heavy. I bet you at one time if you, and I always, every class I have, I say that, I think if you were to drop it and crack it open, there probably would be something inside it, like a penny or something. I say a penny, but anyway, a little rock, pebble, that has actually started that accumulation. So, yeah, it can be a big problem. Again, same farm, same diet. That was probably that farm's problem. But again, it was many, many years of having that. If they're small, they can pass them, okay? But, one's this big, you're never going to pass that, okay? It was probably painful, I would imagine. That's why it didn't actually survive. I don't know the whole story if they just chose not to do colic surgery, or if the horse died first before they realized it. I don't know.
Will the horse be showing signs like colic?
Yeah, it colicked, basically, yeah. Because it becomes impacted, it can't pass anything, becomes very uncomfortable, and then if it does roll around or whatever, it may or may not roll around. I can take that one, you can pass that one around. That one's bigger, more.
When you did the necropsy of Juba with Dr.
Oh, okay. So we found some. How big were they?
They were small. You got the size of a golf ball.
Okay. Yeah. So those, she was pretty old, so I doubt they probably would have killed her. But they just sit there and nothing can actually.
It was Ruby. It was some horse. One of his clients.
Oh, right. Yeah, I didn't know that one. Yeah. I said one of these, because there is a crack in it, so if anyone did drop it, it probably would split. I don't want to do that yet. I think they're kind of cool. Yeah. Is there a medication to prevent it? I've never heard of anything preventing it, other than just manage it with diet. If it's a farm that has given solid straight alfalfa for 20 years, that's too high in calcium, so they probably should have backed off on that. Sometimes accumulation of sand can help too, so maybe psyllium, adding psyllium to the diet can help. It dissolves the sand, so if there's some silicone in that might dissipate that a little bit, and that could help if you're in a really sandy area, which I know, down in South Jersey, we've got a lot of sand. So adding psyllium to the diet, which is just, basically your Metamucil, will help dissolve that as well. So, but really, it just can be managed with diet. All right. Almost done. Where'd it go? There's a clicker. All right. Couple more glands, couple more organs, which are not inside the digestive tract, but are very, very important to the function of the digestive system, okay? The liver is one. Very important. Huge list of things it does. It's called an extramural gland. Extramural meaning not within the system, okay? So it's not connected to the tract that we just went through from the mouth to the anus, okay? It's separate, okay? Has a lot of different things. I remember Dr. Figaro, who does come and do my necropsies, said in vet school they had a big running joke. If you ever had a question, what organ does blah, blah, blah? He goes, if you guess the liver, 90% of the time you'd be right. Because look at all the things it does. It detoxifies, produces plasma protein, forms urine, polypeptide hormones, reduces adrenaline and gonad hormones, forms and secretes bile. It keeps going. It's even more important in the horse because horses do not have a gallbladder. How many got that right on their pre-test? All right, good job. So that is the one organ that horses do not have. So, like in us, our liver still produces the bile and secretes the bile, but it goes directly to our gallbladder and gets stored till we go to McDonald's, eat a Big Mac, Biggie Fry, have a lot of fat, and then we need it, and it secretes the bile, okay? Horses, how much fat is in their diet? Take a guess. Think about how much they're eating, okay? A lot of hay, right? So how much fat do you think a normal horse eats on a daily basis? Percentage? What?
I said
not a lot. You're right, not a lot. Hay, it's close. Hay can be 2 to 3% fat. So it does have some fat in it. So a horse on a normal grain diet with a little bit, or a hay diet with a little bit of grain, yeah, they're probably going to be taking in about 2 to 3% fat. So not a whole lot. Enough so that the production of the bile from the liver can be a very slow production and a slow secretion of the bile, and it will take care of the fat that it needs to, that it can, okay? Performance horses, we start adding a lot of fat to the diet, okay? Or skinny horses, might want to give them more fat, get more calories, and we'll talk a lot about this next week with our nutrients, okay? They still have enough bile to manage 10 to 20, 20 is pretty high, but 10 to 15% fat. 20% fat in the diet is their absolute max. And the only way that you can really get there pretty much is if you have a racehorse and he's given a lot of grain and you take a 2-cup measuring cup of straight vegetable oil and dump it on top of the feed, okay? That's an awful lot of fat. Very rarely do horses need that other than like our racehorses. And we'll talk an awful lot about that later in this class. So know a couple of those problems, or those functions, I'm sorry. So the liver has different parts. Okay, there's a bunch of different lobes to the liver. Some of this is a little more detail than you need, but just know that, horses got all these different lobes and these different processes. That's more, again, more detail than you need, but that's just the different parts to the liver. Then the pancreas. Okay, horses do have a pancreas. That's kind of what it looks like, right? Not really too overwhelming, okay? Kind of looks like a blob of tissue. And really that's what it is. But it has two really, really important functions: endocrine function and exocrine function. The endocrine function is what secretes the insulin and the glucagon, and it helps regulate the sugar levels, okay, or glucose levels. And then the exocrine function is where all the pancreatic enzymes need to be secreted to help digest your fats, your carbohydrates, your proteins, etc. Okay? And all of that is carried into the duodenum by the pancreatic ducts. So big ducts will extend from the pancreas into the duodenum and secrete the enzymes that are needed for this digestion. Okay? So overall kind of summary slide here of what nutrients are digested where, and when we talk about each nutrient, we're going to go back to the part, and we're going to talk about it a lot more. Today was just kind of an overview of the parts and where things are, but, water isn't digested. It's already H2O, right? So it doesn't need to be broken down anymore, but it's absorbed in the colon, okay? Starts in the large colon, ends in the small colon. Protein digestion starts in the stomach. There is a little bit of carbohydrate and fat digestion in the stomach as well, but primarily it's going to be protein. Protein absorption also happens in the small intestine. Jen will cover a little bit of protein fermentation. I didn't cover that a lot, but there is some protein fermentation in the large intestine as well. Lipids, primarily digested and absorbed in the small intestine. Simple carbohydrates like your glucoses, even complex carbohydrates, but still soluble carbohydrates like your starches are in the small intestine. Unless there's an overwhelming amount, then they're going to get fermented. And again, we'll talk about that too. But all of your structural carbohydrates, your fibers, cellulose, hemicellulose, all of those things are going to be digested and absorbed by the microbes in the large intestine or the